suffering too much, I get all soul-searching and weird.
Ever wondered where this pandemic came from?
China?
Oh, you thought it came from China? No, absolutely not. Don't you know? God sent it to us.
Oh. Hello everyone, my name is Obvious, and today I'm going to pretend like I'm collabing with Professor Stick like an insane person.
Technically, if you think about it, anything that happens here on Earth are either directly caused by God or God allowed it to happen. And since he has the power to do anything he wants, allowing it is the same as directly causing it to a certain degree.
Yeah, pretty much.
So yeah, I found this video that talks about this situation a little bit. Why would God bring forth COVID?
There's a question here which I'm sure is echoed by many people. This came through on the Unbelievable YouTube. And the question is, why did God send COVID? Does he enjoy watching people suffer?
Well, I don't think that God enjoys people suffering. I can't think of any reason in the Bible to say that.
There are indeed a few Bible verses that explicitly say God does not enjoy suffering, but that just contradicts with everything he has done and has allowed. Of course, you can make a very twisted argument that this suffering has a greater purpose, regardless of whether he enjoys it or not. We'll get to that later. Personally, if a God did exist, I wouldn't say he enjoys or hates suffering, but rather he is indifferent. He doesn't care about our well-being, almost as if he doesn't exist.
Yeah, I agree completely. I mean, it's an inductive argument, but it's definitely more likely the case since anyone who sees a baby fall into a lake would save it. There's just so little excuse for someone as unlimited as God. And any plausible reason you could possibly come up with will always be based on unverifiable assumptions, whereas the natural reaction to helping people you love while having the ability to do so is something pretty much extremely assumable.
But neither should we think that COVID was necessarily sent by God. I mean, it could have been, who knows? But it could be just the result of evil doing. Justin and I talked about this last time, about the carelessness that may have taken place in that Chinese lab that released this virus into the world.
Wow, even in 2021, we're still spreading conspiracy theories that the virus came from a Chinese laboratory. That's such a last year conspiracy. Get with the program. It's 5G now. But yeah, anyway, regardless of China's actions, God still oversees everything, and he knows the future, so he would have known it was going to happen.
To assume that there's some ever elusive reason for God letting dogs eat babies is like, yeah, it's possible, I guess, but that's that's at the far end of the spectrum of things that are likely.
And so this could again be the kind of intertwining of natural evil and moral evil. So we shouldn't necessarily think that this is something sent by God, but certainly we should say that it's something he permitted to happen, because he could have stopped it if he wanted to.
Yeah, and what's the difference between allowing it to happen and actively creating it? We're talking about God here, who is all-powerful. He could just snap his fingers and the virus would disappear.
Well, hold on, Stick. I'm certain just because I'm not taking homeless people into my house and feeding them and giving them money doesn't mean that I'm the one causing them to be homeless.
It's not like he's going through a lot of trouble. Like, sure, I get it. Maybe if he has to climb a mountain, kill his first son, travel across a few light years, then yeah, maybe he wouldn't be bothered, I guess. And at least there is some sort of justification. But we're talking about God, who can do anything he wants with no effort. Why would he allow this to happen?
Oh, well, that's true. If all I had to do was snap my fingers to end homelessness, I would.
When it's so easy to stop it, not stopping it is the same as actively creating it.
I still wouldn't say he's causing it. I'd say it's more of the act of allowing these things to happen while fully being aware of them and fully being capable of fixing them. And not doing it is, I don't know, what we call it, an immoral inaction. As much as letting a baby fall into a lake right next to you and not helping it would be an immoral inaction.
Especially if you're all-knowing and you created this universe to begin with.
Yeah, you see, that's something that I would compare to just dropping a baby off a cliff and being like, oh, I didn't kill it. The ground and gravity did. That doesn't make any sense. God put us into a situation from his perspective, that is equally as clear that will end in our demise as us dropping a baby off a cliff.
But he permitted it to occur. And I think that whenever God permits suffering and evil in the world, he does so with a view toward a grander purpose that justifies that permission of suffering or evil.
Yeah, there must be some greater purpose to it. We just don't know what it is. But it's there. We just don't know it. But it's there. Don't even try to understand it, because you won't. But just know that the purpose is there.
If you ask me what that purpose is, I would say that in the broadest terms, God's purpose is to bring as many people freely to salvation as he can.
He's bringing them salvation by killing them, of course. Oh, I see what you mean now. There are lots of people who, if they died now, would go to heaven, but give them a few more years and they would sin enough to go to hell. So you gotta kill them now so they go to heaven.
Personally, I would just teleport them to heaven, but I mean, if God wants to draw it out by, making them really, really sick and then suffer for days on end before they get taken to heaven, who am I to judge?
That's salvation right there. I'm sorry I ever doubted you.
I mean, I thought the point of us being on Earth was to test us, but honestly, that's a really high IQ move on God's part, considering he already knows what we're going to do. I mean, geez, God just keeps getting more and more perfect by the day, doesn't he?
So by that logic, would killing babies be doing them a favor, since you don't give them a chance to sin and go to hell?
I mean, absolutely. I don't know why all these Christians are all so pro-life. Just send your babies to heaven. Heck, you should find any good person you know and kill them immediately. But make sure to leave all the evil people on Earth. That way, they have a chance to redeem themselves. And then you can kill them. You're making a lot of sense right now, Stick.
By the way, disclaimer, don't kill babies.
Unless you believe in God, because it just makes too much logical sense.
And that it may well be the case that only in a world suffused with natural and moral evil that the optimal number of persons would freely come to find God's love and forgiveness. I find that not at all implausible.
I see. So you're saying he allowed this to make people aware of his presence. Amazing. Because when there's a new virus going around town killing people, my first thought would be to worship a god who allowed this to happen.
It's funny because you're being sarcastic, but that is the way that people think. When people become very, very desperate and they feel like circumstances out of their hands, they turn to God because they have nothing left.
I mean, if anything, this virus more so shows us how alone we are. We have to be the ones to solve this issue. We have to take responsibility. We must work together to save as many people as possible.
When you look at the places in the world today where Christianity is growing at its most rapid rates, it will be in countries that have experienced terrible natural and moral evil, such as Ethiopia, China, Indonesia, El Salvador, and other places. Whereas in the indulgent nations of Western Europe and North America, the growth rates are pretty much flat.
Developing countries are more likely to turn towards religion than developed countries for a number of reasons.
Well, in the same way that people attributed the things that they didn't understand to gods, like they didn't understand night and day, so they created night and day gods. They didn't understand lightning, so they created a thunder god. So people do the same things with problems that they can't solve, not because it's a logical thing to do, but because they're so desperate that they'll turn to anything. Meanwhile, in societies that are well run with civilians that actually know how to take care of themselves, they don't have to resort to such desperate actions. People will pray and 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 pray for all the bad diseases to go away until somebody finds a cure. That's just the nature of God. It's just people wishing on a star until somebody actually finds a real way to handle things.
So someone has actually asked me, why is it that God has not blessed the nations of Europe and North America with more suffering?
Isn't that just the most twisted, evil, culty shit that you've ever heard in your life? Like, this is why I say that people could be worshiping Satan and they wouldn't be able to tell the difference because they're constantly making up excuses for him. They hold him to no standard of good or evil. It really doesn't matter.
As C.S. Lewis famously said, pain is often God's megaphone to rouse a deaf world.
I'm sure there are plenty of better ways to do this if you really wanted to without killing off millions of people.
Dude, it's not just the killing people, though. It's the suffering that drags on before their death even comes that's messed up.
I always ask, why doesn't God just snap his fingers and make people instantly believe in him and worship him? In which case, I would always get the response, because that is taking away your free will.
You know what's funny? I was told the exact same thing before, and my response was, oh, well, then I want to know God exists of my own free will.
But then where does this stop? Does killing people, instilling fear and suffering, is that any different? How is that different than just making people believe by snapping your fingers?
It's just layers and layers of stupidness. Like, nobody's losing their free will by learning something is true. No one is like going into math class and being like, they taught me 1 + 1 = 2, and I'm so convinced by it that my free will is being tainted. It makes too much sense.
You're pressuring people to believe in your existence, which is just a lesser version of it. It's directing people's free will in a certain direction anyway. If you want people to worship you, you can at least do it in a less violent way. No matter how you do it, you're directing our choices and free will.
Oh, but don't forget, he's not only threatening you with eternal hellfire, but also bribing you with eternal bliss in heaven. And we don't have free will anyway because God already knows our future.
I mean, my feeling has always been that the problem of evil is a problem if you've got a particular definition of God. That is, if God is essentially a divine babysitter who should never allow us to experience any kind of difficulty or pain, then obviously that's a problem. But if God's job is, as you say, Bill, to bring people to a knowledge of him, then there may very well be ways in which a certain amount of suffering does actually enable us to meet God in ways that we wouldn't otherwise have been able to see or hear.
I would be more inclined to believe in a God if the world is peaceful. But anyway, the way you are portraying God here, saying his objective is to make people realize him, sort of paints him in a bad light, doesn't it? It seems to me like he's a narcissist who only cares of his ego being boosted. He would have a much better reputation if you just said he's indifferent.
There's just so many layers of stupidity to this. It's like a wicker basket of fallacies.
And I would want to add one other point that the philosopher Daniel Howard Snyder makes effectively, and that is that the problem is evil is only a problem for someone who doesn't have any good arguments for the existence of God. But Howard Snyder points out, if you've got good reasons to believe that God exists, then the problem of evil is not a problem.
What does that even mean? If you have good reason to believe in God, then the problem of evil is not a problem to you? What are you saying? That your reason should just overshadow it? I'm gonna need an explanation here because I really can't see the merit in that argument.
No, what he's saying just doesn't make any sense because the problem of evil basically already assumes God is real, hypothetically. The problem of evil makes the point that if God was real, then he is evil.
Anyway, before I end the video, I'll briefly give my thoughts on the matter. I am an atheist, and frankly, I've never even thought about this pandemic in the context of religion. I mean, I'm sure every religion has some sort of explanation to it all, but all I see are excuses. Many religions will defend their God to the death, and for these, it's just very cringe to see all the creative ways in which they can twist their morals to justify the pandemic. The truth of the matter is, the pandemic is just something unfortunate that happened. Either admit your God has done something evil by directly causing it or allowing it to happen, or admit that he's either indifferent or doesn't exist. That being said, do I think it's possible that a God exists and just doesn't interact with our world? Certainly, I think that is possible, which means this pandemic would happen and he would just be like, meh, okay. I mean, for all we know, we could be ants compared to this God, and you know, we don't really care about ants.
The rest of this video is just a Mobius strip of stupidity that makes me dizzy. Check out my other videos. Maybe there's something cool in there and you could be my 30th subscriber. Hiya.